Hi, in the previous class, you were able to understand what a router is and its functions. Now in this class, you should be able to configure the router with some set of commands and able to manage the router. I know it's just a beginning for you for managing the router, but trust me, slowly you will become an expert and able to manage the network devices. Let's first understand the command line structure of the router. The router iOS has command line interface and it has three command line modes. First, user mode, second, privilege mode, and third, global configuration mode. Each mode has access to the different set of iOS command. Let's start with user mode. The user mode is the first mode of the router and it can be visible as soon as user has access to the router after logging into it. The user mode can be identified by a symbol less than along with the router name. Here you can see this is the prompt which is called user mode. This mode allows the user to execute only basic commands, and this mode does not allow user to configure anything on the router. Now let's understand the privilege mode. The privilege mode allows users to view the router configuration, restart the router, verify the feature status, and to allow users to enter into a global configuration mode. The privilege mode also allows all the commands that are available in the user mode. The privilege mode can be identified by the symbol hash and followed with the router name. From the user mode, you need to execute the command enable to access the privilege mode. Let me do this for you. So I need to execute command enable to access the privilege mode. So this particular mode is called privilege mode. The privilege mode can be protected with a password, but at this point it is not required. I will cover this section in the upcoming task. Let's move to the next part and understand the global configuration mode. The global configuration mode allows users to configure the router and modify the router configuration. From the privilege mode, you need to execute the command configure terminal to access the global configuration mode. The global configuration mode can be identified by this symbol. So we have a router and under the brackets we have a config then hash sign. The global configuration mode has various sub modes like interface mode, sub interface mode, routing protocol configuration mode, and there are many other modes. Now moving to the next topic. The next topic is how to assign a hostname on the router. Generally providing an identity to the router and to configure a name for the router. To assign the hostname on the router, you need to use the command hostname from the global configuration mode. As soon as you assign a name on the router, the default prompt will change with immediate effect. If you want to roll back the hostname for the router, use the command no hostname. The router prompt will change to the default name of the router. Let's see how exactly it works. So first we have to go into the global configuration mode because most of the commands we execute or we apply on the router, it's generally on the global configuration mode. So what I said, we need to use the keyword hostname. Then we need to give the name of the router. So I'm here using Techno Cafe. As soon as you enter the command, the default host name is gone and the new host name is applied to the router. Remember I told you if you want to roll back the settings for the host name, then you can use the command no host name. Let's try this one also. So no host name. That's it. So you can see that the host name Techno Cafe is no longer available. The default host name router has been applied on the router. So let me configure the host name again. Now it's time to protect the console port of the router. With this option, you will allow users to enter the correct password if they want to check something on the router and make the changes on the router. If a user puts the wrong password on the router simply denies the access. Why it is so important? If you leave the console port unprotected, then any user can access the router and make the changes. This may cause a huge impact in the router and the user may face issues accessing the network resources. To protect the router, you need to create a login credential for the console. Let me show you how. Let's go to the global configuration mode. Now the command is line console and we have only one console port, so that's what it is 0. So use the command line console 0. Then we have to supply the password. So password. So what password you are going to supply? I'm using a very basic password here, but if you are working in a production network, make sure your password is more healthier and more complex. So I'm using the password Cisco. Now the next command is login. That's it. So we have applied line console 0, then the next command password and the password which we want to apply. The third command is login, and then the next one is exit. Now let's see whether we can get the prompt to supply the password. Now we can see the prompt where we have to supply the password. So the password was Cisco. Let me show you what happens when you don't know the password or you are supplying a wrong password. So let me exit once again. We got the password prompt. Now I'm going to supply a wrong password. Then again, then again. The router generally gives you 3 attempts to supply the correct password. If in case you do not enter the correct password, it will reset the password prompt screen, or I would say refresh the login screen and ask you to enter the correct password again. Now it's time to assign an IP address on the router interface, but before that you must understand the interface types. Generally, a router has multiple types of interfaces like Ethernet, fast Ethernet, gigabit Ethernet, 10 gigabit Ethernet, 40 gigabit Ethernet, serial interface, and there are many more interfaces. But most of the common interfaces are fast Ethernet, gigabit Ethernet, 10 gigabit Ethernet, and serial interfaces. To view the summary of router interfaces, you need to execute the command show IP interface brief from the privilege mode. It will display all the interfaces available on the router. So let me execute the command show IP interface brief. Show IP interface brief. So right now you can see I have total 4 interfaces: gigabit Ethernet 0/0, 0/1, 0/2, and 0/3. It does not mean that the same interfaces are available on the other routers. It may be different. Assign an IP address on the interface, first we need to go into the global configuration mode. So let me go into the global configuration mode. The command is configure terminal. So now I am on global configuration mode. From here, I need to go into the specific interface configuration mode. So my interface, I'm going to assign the IP address on gigabit Ethernet 0/0. So I can select this interface and then use the command interface and interface name. Now the command is IP address. You need to choose which IP address you are going to assign on this interface. So I'm going to assign 192.168.200.1, and I need to provide the subnet mask for this IP address. That's it. Remember, by default, all the interfaces of the router are shutdown state. So what we have to do is we have to use the command no shutdown to answer the interface. So let me use that command no shutdown, and that's it. So what I did, I went to the interface configuration mode, I assigned the IP address, I made the port up, and then came out from the interface configuration mode. Now let's check the status of the interface and the IP address assigned on this interface using the command show IP interface brief. So the command show IP interface brief has to be run on the privilege mode. So we can go back to the privilege mode, and the command is show IP interface brief. Okay, well, I can see the interface gigabit Ethernet 0/0, and it has IP address 192.168.200.1. Status for this interface is up, and line protocol is also up. Before moving ahead, let's understand how to verify the configuration by using the keyword show. The show commands are very useful in terms of troubleshooting and validating the configuration. The show commands can be executed to examine nearly every configuration applied on the router, and all these commands mainly work on the privilege mode. Let me execute some show commands for your reference so that you can understand how it works. To check all interfaces statistics, use the command show interfaces. So right now we have only 4 interfaces on our router. So let's execute the command show interfaces. Okay, so first, second interface I can see, third interface I can see, and the fourth interface I can see. To check the specific interface statistics, use the command show interface and interface name. So I'll do it for you. So I'm looking the very first interface information or statistics. So the command is show interface. So the command is show interfaces and the interface name. So my interface name is Gigabit Ethernet 0/0. Yeah, I can see here the statistics for the interface Gigabit 0/0. So what exactly you can have inside the interface? So you can see the interface name is Gigabit Ethernet 0/0, which is up. The line protocol for this interface is also up. What type of hardware it is? It is Gigabit Ethernet. The address in the sense is the MAC address of this interface. Internet address is the IP address of this interface 192.168.200.1/24. We can see the MTU size for this interface. We can see the bandwidth for this interface. We can see the duplex for this interface. We can see what type of media can be connected on this interface. And you can have a hell lot of information about the interface. To check the summary of all IPv4 interfaces, including status and IP addresses, use the command show IP interface brief. So we have already used this command. So let me do it one more time for you. So show IP interface brief. So you can see all the four interfaces are listed here. We can see one interface is up and rest three interfaces are down. We can see the IP address assigned on the interface Ethernet, Gigabit Ethernet 0/0. Okay, okay. To check the current time and date for the router, use the command show clock. So I'm using the command show clock now. So here you can see the calendar information. So right now we can see the time is 7:04. The time zone is UTC, day is Wednesday, month is March, date is 30th March, and the year is 2020. To check the current iOS version in the router, use the command show version. This command does not even show the iOS version detail. It also displays other information such as configuration register value, router's uptime, and hardware modules detail. So let's execute this command. Show version. Okay, let's scroll up for a moment. So we can see that the iOS version, which is viOS, is a virtual iOS. Then we can see the system uptime, which is 57 minutes. We can see the flash detail where iOS image is loaded. We can see the information here that 4 gigabit Ethernet interfaces are attached to this router. We can also see the configuration register value is 0x0. Now let's understand what is running configuration and what is startup configuration. Actually, the router stores two types of configuration in it: startup configuration and running configuration. So the running configuration means you execute some command on the router and do not save them. In such cases, the router stores configuration in RAM. But there is a problem here. If the router restarts or shuts down, the router loses the running configuration available in RAM. So let's see how we can check the running configuration. The command is show running config. So command is show running config. As soon as you execute the command, it fetches the information from the RAM. Let's scroll it up. Okay, so this command we have applied, hostname techno cafe. Then we can see the command interface Ethernet Gigabit 0/0. We can see the interface Gigabit Ethernet 0/0 and the IP address assigned on that interface. Then the next thing is the console part. So we protected our console port with the password, so that configuration is available. If you save those configuration, if you save the current configuration, the router makes a copy of the same configuration and stores in the NVRAM. And this configuration cannot be deleted or erased if the router restarts or shut down. So let me check the startup configuration. To check the startup configuration, we need to execute the command show startup. So right now there is no configuration is available in NVRAM. So let's first save the configuration. To save the configuration, we need to execute the command write memory. As soon as you execute this command, the router makes a copy of the same configuration and load it into the NVRAM. Now we can use the command show startup config to see the configuration available in the NVRAM. So command is show startup. So we can see the configuration has been copied from the RAM and stored into the NVRAM. Let's validate the configuration once again. So we can see host name is TechnoCafe, and we can see the interface gigabit Ethernet 0/0 is up and has the IP address. Good. Now the next part is line console 0 is protected with the password. So there are many more show commands to validate the router's feature and configuration. You will slowly learn and understand the meaning of each command. At this point, and that's enough for you to understand how exactly show command works. So finally, you are a little bit familiar with the router and how to set up a router with some set of commands. Till now, most of the activities are performed using the console connection. Let's prepare the router for the Telnet connection. But before applying the command on the router, you must understand what is Telnet feature is. So router can be managed over the network by using the standard TCP/IP protocol like Telnet, SSH, HTTP, HTTPS. So Telnet was developed in early days of Unix operating system to manage the computers remotely. But this was not at all secured enough. Then SSH was introduced, and SSH is more secure way to configure a router or any other network devices. Even SSH communication is encrypted. Since we are talking about the Telnet, so let's first configure the Telnet. Okay, so we have to apply the command on the global configuration mode. So the command is line VTY. So VTY represent the virtual terminal that can be remotely accessible. Right now I can see n number of terminals available, whereas the same was not available in the console because console has only one single terminal. So I can use all of them here. So 0 to 924. Then what we need to do is we need to protect the virtual terminal with the password. So I'm going to apply the password here. So password is Cisco. Now, so we are going to prepare this for login point of view. Yeah, we need to use the command login. Now, the another command is transport input. So what method you are going to use it here? You want to use SSH, you want to use Telnet or any other method. So I'm going to use Telnet method. So I can give the keyword Telnet here. That's it. Now it's time to test whether the Telnet terminal is working for this router or not. So let me show you the design first. I have two routers, router 1 and router 2. Both are directly connected with gigabit Ethernet 0/0 interface. So currently we are working on VIOS 1 and we need to prepare VIOS 2 so that we can make the Telnet session from VIOS 2 to VIOS 1. So quickly let me configure the router 2. Okay, so I have completed the basic configuration on this router so that this router can communicate to the router 1. Okay, so let's validate the reachability first using the command ping. So I'm going to ping 200.1. This IP address is assigned on the router 1. Perfectly, it's working. Now it's time to telnet the router 1 from the router 2 or VPC, virtual PC. So the command is telnet and we need to use the IP address of the router 1, which is 192.168.200.1. Okay, it's giving me a prompt to enter the correct password. So I remember the password because I have made the configuration on router 1. So I use same password here. So the password is Cisco. Yes, I can see that the router 1 is accessible via Telnet. Let me tell you one more thing. With these many commands, a router can definitely give you access. However, router will not allow you to enter into a privilege mode. You have very limited access to the router. Even if you try to access the privilege mode, it will not allow you to enter and ask you to enter enable password. Let me show you. So right now I'm on user mode and I'm going to enter in privilege mode. So the command is enable. See here, it's asking me to enter a password to access the privilege mode. Okay, let's understand the what is enable password. The enable password provides another level of security for the router. If a user tries to access the router via console or VTY session or virtual terminal, the user has to enter a login password for the console or VTY password. Then again, user has to supply enable password on the router to get the privilege level access. Okay, let's first configure the enable password on the router 1 and then we will try to access the router 1 from the router 2. So I'm going to exit from the VTY session. Okay, done. Let's go to the router 1. So password is Cisco enable. We need to go into the configuration global configuration mode and we need to execute the command enable password and we need to supply the password here also. So password is Cisco. Okay, so now we have to go back to the virtual PC or router 2 and make the telnet session from here to router 1. Okay, it's well and good. We got the prompt to supply the password. So we are supplying the password. Now try to access the privilege mode. So I'm going to enter the command enable. So now I have enable password with me and I can use it here to get the privilege access. So password is Cisco. So as soon as you enter the password, you will get the privilege level access. Now it's over to you. You have to deploy a basic topology in your simulator and try to test these features.